and then jump right in. Susan and I had a conversation. If someone comes, they can't say anything until we take a vote or the meeting, or we're done, one or the other. And that's the way it's going to work. So hopefully that'll keep it moving. So with that, I will do the Pledge of Allegiance of the flag. If you want to stand, that's great. If you don't want to stand, that's okay. Just be respectful of the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. David?
Yeah, now we'll ask for a moment of silence for our police force, our emergency services workers, our fire department, our healthcare workers who go in harm's way every day, and those who serve and those who have served in our military. Thank you.
Okay. Ricky, are you running the show?
Well, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to go through the budget, to answer any questions. And then hopefully at the end of the meeting, if the board's in agreement, to authorize us to advertise, I would say to draft the budget that's in front of you with some changes. So I guess the question, do you guys want to start in the beginning? Where do you want to start line item by line item? Mike sent around some information. He had a couple of comments. You want to start with them? I don't know if Mike wants to say something.
I can. Good evening, everybody. I'd be pleased to start with the proposed considerations relative to the budget. As you know, John and I met with Rick and Chris last Friday, and the so-called proposal that I put together does not have John's name on it, because while John and I concurred on a number of things at the session that we had on Friday, John, these were my thoughts specifically, and I didn't want to speak for John. We didn't have any specific consensus or disagreement Friday. It was just these notes that I put together as thoughts for the proposed budget to address the proposed budget deficit of $800,000+ were mine, but they came out of the discussion we had on Friday. So I'd be pleased to share those, but I can also remain silent if someone else wants to make any comments or has a different way that they'd like to proceed through this tonight. I figure we're probably going to be here for a couple hours. We have plenty of time.
I would ask John to see if he is in agreement with you and what you wrote, because he was there. Is that right, John?
Well, before John even comments, what I put together was a broad list of things, and whether we pick at that individually or we intersperse that I put together as we go through the budget individually, individual line items, et cetera. I think we ought to at least figure out how we want to approach it. So, whether John has comments on how we approach it tonight, or Michelle or David or yourself, Marty, we ought to at least hash that out for a minute or two so we can proceed according to that kind of a.
I have a suggestion. We have a proposed budget that was presented. We had a discussion in June about the budget. Then we have a proposed budget that was sent to the township supervisors a month before the meeting. No comments were made in that month until we had our meeting. And then we had our meeting. And people wanted to make some changes to the budget. My recommendation is we have a proposed budget on the table. If anyone wants to make any proposed changes to the proposed budget, they bring it up at this meeting and defend their position. And we all agree or disagree on that change to the proposed budget and move forward. I have 2 hours this evening.
I see Michelle.
I like that. I like that.
Michelle wanted to go through the actual budget line by line. but
No,
that takes time.
it's okay. I'm okay with David's suggestion. John, what do you think?
I want to chime in and say, we spent more than 2 hours with Chris and Rick on Friday. Mike and I did. The three of them did more of the heavy lifting than I did. But I was in total agreement with the suggestions that Mike came in with. What you'll see is many deferrals into the next year and some cuts of the budget. Generally speaking, especially if people listen to this later on, what they need to know is that we had a hole in the budget of about $800,000, which was going to be pulled down from the general fund. I call it the rainy day or slush fund. That's probably not proper, but it's a fund that we have that we can take money from. My philosophical point was that many people in the township are doing well, but there are a good number of people in the township who have lost jobs, lost time, even businesses have been lost, and we have to be really concerned about that. What Mike did was to come in and point out $650,000 that could be deferred or cut from the budget. And I was very pleased at that. I am not familiar enough with the budget to do something like that myself, but I thought what Mike did, I was in total agreement with. And what I would suggest is that we let him go over those changes and see if we agree with them. And then if we want to do line items, we can do line items.
Well, I'd be pleased to do that, John, and David and Marty and Michelle. First of all, I do want to comment that the Finance Committee did a lot of work in advance, and David is correct. I know for myself, I was pretty quiet during that period, and I apologize to both Marty and David, as well as Rick, and at the time, John Altshaw, for not investing more in it during that period. Excuses as I may, with the schedule I had, and of course I have my own budget in where I work at East Bradford, which has been consuming me. We've had our own deficit challenges as well, structural as well as immediate, and so I did not spend the time that I needed. So I am an apology to the Finance Committee for doing the work and not offering comment prior to really. Well, I had some uninformed comments really that were not reckless per se, although I characterized it as that at our meeting last week because I had not been prepared enough. So I do want to offer that apology before I start because I do appreciate the work that you did and the Finance Committee did in initially dropping anywhere from $100,000 to $120,000 off of the budget with some specific items which we saw in the presentation last Tuesday.
Can I say something, Mike, before we get started? David, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that I'm correct, but it could be wrong. The Finance Committee meets with John historically to go over the budget and to clarify anything or to make suggestions to him or whatever. That we do not make decisions. Everything is to be made by the board. So I just want to clarify that. So you get it about a month ahead of time or thereabouts. And the idea is to scrutinize the budget and come prepared to make comments around the draft budget. Once that's done, it's then sent over and we have 20 days to have people view it and comment on it if they want to. And then we have a meeting and we accept we make a decision on the final budget. That's the way it works. It's supposed to work. And I appreciate what Mike said, but unfortunately, I think there was probably not enough explanation made to those who are newer that there's an obligation going along that is when you get to the time of looking at the budget, the temporary budget, the permanent, the first budget, that it's really important to have yourself lined up to make whatever you do so we can get it over to to get it done in the first meeting in December, so we don't get tangled up in the holidays or snow or whatever, because that you must by law get it done by the end of the year. But we have chosen to do this. We've done this way for years, and it's worked. But I suspect that we probably should have had some information conveyed out to ask people, to let people know what was expected of them. So I appreciate Mike's apology, but I think it was a question of some of us knew and some of us didn't. And we ended up at the meeting, on the last meeting we had, and some were prepared and some weren't prepared. And as a consequence of that, here we are tonight. Now, my goal tonight, and I talked to Ricky about this, is to get to the point where we make a motion to put the thing up for advertisement or whatever you want to call it, where people look at it. And at least 20 days from now, we take a vote. That's my goal. Now, you can ask Ricky or myself or David or all of us anything you want about this, or you can just comment on it, and we'll be happy to explain what we think. But the important thing is for people to realize we make no decision along the way in this process. All we do is to make sure that there's clarity, there's understanding, and everything is in order.
One thing I'd like to talk about tonight, or if not tonight, in the future, is a revision to the budget development process, so it's more inclusive and everyone understands what's going on along the way, rather than the current process. I mean, some townships include, all 5 or all 3 supervisors in the budget process the entire way along. So there really isn't much of a finance committee. The board is the committee. And I think part of the issue was that it wasn't as inclusive as it needed to be from an informational flow standpoint. So.
Thank you. I agree with that, David. Thank you for that. And actually, I was prepared last week, but the fact is that it felt more like it was being dictated. This is what we had to do, and pretty much that was it. So I didn't feel like it was a very I did not feel that the conversation time was there, and I think that it does need to be a little bit more inclusive so that everybody is on board and understanding of what the numbers really, what they mean. And like I said, I was prepared to argue my points, but the fact is that it just didn't feel like it was a very good opportunity to do that. So I'd really like to hear what Mike has to say, because I think that I have a pretty good understanding of what they had gone over. And I appreciated that worksheet that you sent out, Mike. It was really helpful.
So let me before Mike starts, I'll give you an overarching kind of feel for where I'm coming from on each item. I'm not in favor of a regressive budget, and I'm not in favor of kicking the can down the street. We did that last year on deferred maintenance, and now we're kicking the can down the street again. Keep in mind that over $300,000 of the 810 general fund deficit was deferred maintenance from the previous year. So if we keep kicking the can down the street, we get deferred maintenance from last year, we get deferred maintenance from this year, and it accumulates, and it's a regressive budget process. We built the infrastructure. We have to maintain the infrastructure. We're paying a penalty for not paying attention to the ponds in the future. If we defer road maintenance, all it's going to do is pile up on us, and we're going to have to do more and more and more, and it's going to cost us more in the future. As far as road maintenance, if you want to throw the entire paving schedule and discuss it, I heard it was a 17-year cycle, then I heard it was now it's a 19-year cycle. What is the cycle, and what does it need to be? If you want to push the whole cycle out so that we're not maintaining our roads as frequently as we did, I would consider something like that. But this kicking the can down the road on maintenance is a precedence that I'm not particularly in favor of.
There's I want to follow up by what David said, because it's something that I'm not sure that everybody understands or has even thought about. We're very fortunate to have a very good reputation. And that's in large part due to a couple factors. One, and Mark's crew is one of the most important factors. They do a fabulous job in cleaning snow to the point of being almost, they're like the third best rated by PennDOT in the state of Pennsylvania. Now that's pretty impressive because there's snow out west that we don't get here. Also, we do have the road program, be it 17, 18, or 19 years. Mark goes around looking at the things and sees what needs to be done that year, and it gets done. And our people recognize that we take far better care of our roads than other townships do. And you can look at that when you ride in other townships. You know, the second you leave East Goshen and you go to another township. A lot of what we do, or what the public works people do, along with Jason and the park and recreation programs and the equipment that we have and everything else that goes with a park. That is why East Goshen is thought so highly of in its big form. And we got to be really careful that if we eliminate something, we're eliminating something that's not going to wreck our reputation. And I certainly second what John is saying. We got to be careful that there are people that are okay and there are people that are not okay with respect to their finances. So probably there's more okay than not okay, but I don't know that. And I don't think we have any information that tells us that. But the simple fact of the matter is we got to make sure that we do not degenerate our reputation, because that makes our houses as successful in selling as possible. So I throw that word of caution out there just so everybody is aware of it.
Okay. All right. Thanks for those comments. I'll also give a couple of broad comments as well before we hit the specifics of what I've offered, at least. David, I share with you, and believe me, I've been living with it in my own professional capacity in another municipality for years, of deferred maintenance, structural deficits, and sustainability of capital reserve fund, et cetera. It's not a pleasant picture. It's challenging, and it can snowball. I would also say that the savings that we have, and refer to it as fund equity, unappropriated fund balance, however you want to look at it, have been solid and strong. The forecast doesn't look good there. Those funds are very fragile. Once a 10% deficit is projected in this current proposal is implemented, with a couple of the prior years, when you look at the revenue source, particularly our earned income, which is our primary treasury, the earned income has decreased. The actual numbers have decreased over the last year, since 2016, to the point where our budget for next year, this 21 budget, is down. I know John likes to use the compared to the actual, and he shows that it's up, but our revenues are down on the earned income the last 4 or 5 years. So we are, as Marty, you said last week, we are a build-out township. One building permit for a new structure last year, irrespective of all the accessory building permits, et cetera. Our development years are over, and therefore our revenues are also fragile because they are not showing a return or an increase on a regular basis. You cannot rely on real estate transfer taxes to have a bonus unexpected. They may or may not occur. It's a wonderful thing when it happens, but you can't rely on that. They're very unpredictable. The earned income tax is much more predictable. Obviously, the property tax is very predictable, and there are 3 main bundles. They are not keeping up with expenses. In that regard, there is no doubt in my mind, and as any public may be listening, that I think is a township and a board, whether it's 2022 or 2023, a budget a revenue increase and enhancement is going to be necessary to sustain the quality of the financial management and picture that we've had here over the years. And there's no other way that I see to recoup that strength of the revenues to the expenses unless we have a property tax increase sooner than later. And 1/10 of a mil is not going to do it at $160,000 when we're looking at the deficits that we are. That said, that's a conversation we're going to be having as a board, and hopefully advancing our outreach to residents in the months in the next year or two ahead, as we advance a likely strategy of having to implement either incrementally or likely incremental property tax increases over these next years ahead. As uncomfortable as that may be, when you look at the expenditure side, there is not a lot to cut. I believe that the staff that is in place in East Goshen Township is not fat, lean even, might be the case. The quality of work, as Marty referred to in the Public Works Department, is nonpareil. The rest of the staff, the professional quality and the work ethic that they've had through each department head and the staff that supports them has been just exceptional. And I place them against anybody in this county, let alone any others in the Commonwealth. So I don't see a lot of room there to move with the organizational structure we have and the service provisions that we have and the expectations that our residents have that all translate into a great place to live and property values, et cetera. So kicking the can down the road, it's a difficult situation. We have been in a challenged year. I think next year is going to continue to be a challenge regarding our whole environment of accomplishing work, let alone the structural environment of revenues. On a couple of the items specifically, if I move to those and we look, for instance, at the first one that I put down of the Bow Tree Pond, I did speak to Mark Miller, and yes, the basin can use improvement. It is a storm basin. Marydale Pond was in a disaster zone, and I'm really pleased that we got that one done, and there's some expenditure in it to complete the landscaping and the green soft work that needs to be completed for 18 or 20,000. That definitely should be done. But when we look at Bow Tree Pond, it may be a deferral, but I think that at least we can, if we put this off for a year, we can examine our finances better. I know it's a can down the road, but I think it's one that we can survive. And Mark Miller indicates that it can still function effectively for another year or more without any serious issue, excepting the aesthetics, as I commented. The repavement of Killer.
Hey, Mike, before you move on, 3 years ago, we had 6 ponds that are owned by the township and are our responsibility to maintain.
Yeah.
We did a study on those. We had Natural Lands come in and look at those, and they did water quality studies, and we kind of prioritized those, based on how dire they were and needed remediation. That was 3 years ago. So we have these 6 ponds and we agreed that we needed remediation on these. We deferred maintenance on these ponds, and we didn't pay attention to them the way we probably should have for a long time.
Great.
So everyone needs to know that it's just not the Bow Tree Pond dredging that we're deferring. We're deferring the action on other ponds because we triaged them. This is the most important, next most important, third, most important. So we're not just kicking this can down the road. We're deferring the maintenance on the subsequent ponds that we're supposed to be paid attention to. So I just want to make that comment.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I was right behind the pond study. And in fact, not to put wind in my sail, but I pursued it. I initiated it. And so, because it's an asset that we need to take care of, and you're right, it hadn't been taken care of, these assets for years. So that's caught up with us in the form of the study and what we're trying to do. And in the same context as the road paving program that I'm going to comment on here now with these 3 roads, and suggesting that they be deferred after conversation with the Public Works Director. The schedule.
Hey, Mike, to make this, can I propose something to make this easier?
Sure.
Rather than go through each one of those, you and John spent some time on this, and John has kind of stacked hands with you on these. And these seem to be the ones that are most impactful. Could we take each one of them individually, make comments on them, and then make a decision whether we're going to go yes or no, thumbs up or thumbs down?
Smart, David. Sure. So we come back to the Bow Tree Pond. The suggestion is to defer that expense next year in 21 and see if it fits into 22's budget as we look ahead to it. So my suggestion here is that is deferred and taken out of this 21 proposed budget.
Could I say something, Mike?
Oh, sure, Mark. Where are you? Nice to hear your voice. Go ahead.
No problem. On the Bow Tree Pond, I would propose that we do the stream bank restoration, which we have the permit for. We already have the materials in place. So the only cost would be the Township Public Works Department labor to install the large rocks, which will stop the sedimentation from getting into the pond. That would be the first phase. And then if you want to defer desilting the pond, then we could do that, because that's going to be expensive, because we have to pump it out. We have to use a whole different situation to do that pond. But we already have the boulders in play, already have the boulders on site, and it would just be township labor to stop the silt from coming in. That would be the first phase that we could get done. And then the desilting, we could do that the following year. That's just the thought. You decide what you want to do. That's just the
That's
thought.
a good comment, Mark. Do you have any sense of the $200,000 versus what dollar amount you're referring to there if we were to implement, let's call it the phase one of that particular project next year?
Well, that would be your Public Works Department employees placing the boulders in place. So you'd probably have about $10,000 in rental equipment, and then you'd have some money in labor. But they're already there, so we're already paying our guys to be there. We're just giving them a job to do.
All right, Mark, that sounds like a smart thing. I appreciate that suggestion. That this is first we've heard of it, and I'm glad you mentioned it. I can certainly support that, because number one, it will affect some elements of the improvement to that pond, so that we're not completely avoiding it next year. If it does mitigate siltation, that's a positive right off the bat. It can be done for the most part internally. The other material, as you indicate, is on site. I can certainly support that. And so if the deferral looks like instead of 200,000, it goes down to 190 or something in that vicinity, for one supervisor, I can support that. So let's continue on that line item. How John, Michelle, Marty, David.
Now, that was just food for thought. So
That's great. I love that. And I would even go as far as saying, if we can defer 180,000, and then at least there's a little bit of wiggle room for equipment rentals and materials.
it's not a lot for just
Rick
so
and
you,
Chris, how does that fit into the budget?
Well, I mean, it's in the budget right now, John.
I understand.
200,000.
Can- Based on this discussion, Chris, Rick, can we cut $180,000 from that budget line item?
Yes, yeah, if you choose, if the board agrees to, you can.
Okay, I agree to that. I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I think it's a smart resource that we have Mark Miller and his team start working on it anyway. It's going to be a longer term project.
So we do a phase one next year, essentially,
Yeah.
and then see what it looks like and Mark, you may have a reassessment of what it's going to be once you're down there, so to speak, in the dirt and the silt doing that work. And you may say, well, the estimate may be X, Y, Z now that we see it and we've been actually mucking around.
well, by putting the rocks in next year, you're going to stop the silt from getting into the pond.
Yeah.
And that's the goal.
So,
Okay.
so there's an open proposal there now there's a revision to this one to do a so-called phase one, still defer a substantial amount of dollars, let's call it $180,000 on this particular item to pull out of the current budget, and to complete with some $20,000 or so internally the portion of the work for next year. So I can support that. If we're going to go through one by one, we should give it the thumbs up, thumbs down, I suppose, folks. I can give it a thumbs up.
I can give it a thumbs up as well.
Me too.
Not me.
I'm a no.
Okay, so let's add 3-2. All right.
Wait a minute, I want to say, we're commenting on these. I need everybody to understand, and I'm not, I swore to Ricky that I would not say anything, but that's impossible for me to do, and I certainly am not
Go ahead, Marty.
teaching. When you defer something at this stage of the game, you are going to find out, as I have over time, that it never gets done. It just can't. The next time, the next year will be worse than the year before. And the year after that will be worse than the year the first year. So you get doing that, and David makes a hell of a good point. When we took in the ponds under our wing, we anticipated fixing them. And I don't know if you've seen the Bowtree Pond. I have, but it is a mess. And it has been the only one that I really heard about. And most of the time that I've been around here, I really never heard about the Marydale Pond in terms of its condition. I've heard about the Bowtree Pond more and often. In fact, it's got an island in it, to say the least. And it is part of the stormwater system, among other things. So I think we have to be really, really careful with whatever we cut, because chances are in the world that we're in today, that we may never get to put it back in place. So I am very cautious about these things. I don't know what David's position is. He can speak for himself, but I certainly think that we need to do this pond. It's possible that after that, they drop off they may be able to be deferred for a while. But David is absolutely correct. Those ponds, I don't even remember the last time the ponds were fixed in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I'm not even sure.
Never worked, Marty.
Pardon me?
Those ponds have never been touched.
That's what I thought. I was going to say they'd never, in the 36 years I've been here, they never, as far as I was concerned, they would never touched at all.
Marty, it's a good point, but you know what? It just like that kind of maintenance that was either implicitly or unknowingly deferred for 20 years, or now we've caught it and we did the study and we see what's there, but it doesn't mean you can compress it after 20 years of deferrals into a 3 or 4 year schedule with the financial challenges we have. So yeah, it may be a bit more difficult next year or the year after to push it in there, but we will make every effort to do that. But you can't just push 20 years of deferrals into now a 3 year schedule and say we're going to do them. So I would contend that was a prior board and that didn't focus on that. And I'm not knocking that per se. I'm just saying it wasn't a focus, but now it was brought to our attention. It's in front of us. We're starting to address it, but we can't compress it necessarily into a 3 year schedule.
Hey, Rick, I have a question. Was that pond part of our stormwater management compliance with the state?
Yes, but keep in mind is wet ponds, it doesn't matter how much mud's in the pond, because the retention takes place from the existing water level to the top of the outfall.
But still functions.
And
Any retention pond can fill in with silt and become a wetland. And the outlets, because it measures from the water level up. It does, the amount of silt in it doesn't make any difference at all.
And David, also, could I add that if we put the rocks in and recreate the plunge pools next year, that will help with any further silt getting into that pond, and we'll be just dealing with the silt that's there now. So by doing the rocks, even though it's 2-stage, it will definitely help the situation.
Okay.
Well, as
May
far
we
as I was
move on to the
concerned,
next item?
wait a minute, you made a commitment to the people over there, and they're going to expect it to be done. That's what all I could say. So I have many more than one reason to think that it's necessary to get at least this pond out of the way. It's so bad.
Well, you know, it is a frustrating thing when you try and make a commitment. You make a commitment to try and get something done with best intentions, but other circumstances come into play, and we've got a complex, layered situation here that folks may not understand. They may be looking at the veneer of it with what they see and what they expect, but we know there's a lot more under the surface, so to speak, in our financial picture that, I'll be happy to take some of that heat if someone calls or we have some of our expected emails that come through. It's just one of those things. We've got, in my opinion, we've got to make certain decisions that are hard right now as we look at our next year or two ahead, 2 or 3 years ahead, irrespective of the current CV-19 circumstances. May we move on to the next item?
Yeah. As far as I'm
Okay.
concerned.
The roads that, there were 3 roads that were listed here that were considered as a possibility. They were deferred. Speaking with Mark and talking about the road maintenance plan, whether it's a 15-year schedule, 16, 17, 19, it's assessed every year and revised, and same in any other municipality. And Mark has said that the roads, even though they haven't been resurfaced in 19 years, I think is what you said, Mark, they are in good condition. There's been some repairs done to them, but they are not in a state of disrepair. They are quite usable, and they are not aesthetically looking terrible as far as I know. And to reshift that schedule and move some other roads around, that's the work of the Public Works Director to try and make the best of the resources. And unless Mark says that's a complete compromise to his schedule, I will continue to suggest that that is a proposal to take that $100,000 out of the budget.
Just so to the other board members, in 2017 and 2018, we did do excessive road repairs to Eastwick Circle because there was a water problem. So we went up and we milled and paved. So most of this, over half of the street has been repaved. So we're good that way. Great Oak Circle, again, they had a drainage problem that had failed from the builder, and we went in and remilled out the cul-de-sac, put in some additional drains, and we paved probably just over halfway. So those 2 streets they're okay. They're at the 18-year mark, but they're okay. We can defer them, and that's not a problem. Kilhern Lane is the original blacktop. It's a cul-de-sac street. I checked it again today. The edges of the road are in pretty good shape, and I feel we can definitely get another year out of that without causing any damage to the understructure of the road.
I have a quick question, Mark. Mark, do you happen to know what the paving schedule is for surrounding townships? Where we fall on that scale? Like, do you know what West Goshen does? And I guess Mike would know what East Bradford does, that kind of thing.
West Goshen is playing, I don't mean this be in a mean way. They are playing catch up because they didn't do anything for many years.
Okay.
And they also,
Westtown?
I do not know about.
Westtown had a 100-year plan.
Uh-huh.
They recently upgraded, so now they're playing catch up.
Okay. Mike, what does East Bradford do?
Bradford, we have about 55 miles of road in East Bradford. So we do have a good number of roads. We have a 15-year schedule that is not working effectively. We can't keep up with the 15-year schedule. So we're more in the order of 18 to 19-year schedule now. But again, reassessing it every year with the available resources we have.
I would also point out that East Goshen Township is, other than Euclid, is the only township that's doing everything in-house. So we're not paying union wages and so forth for the milling or the overlay, and that's where we make our savings.
Absolutely. And
so just keep in mind what we're talking about doing is deferring these 3 roads and deferring paving. So we just criticized 2 townships for doing that, deferring it, and the roads not being and playing catch up. And now we're planning on doing some playing catch up. So
I was just wondering what the surrounding townships do.
I know, and it's a good question. I'm just saying
they're way behind us, and that's why
we got 2 patched, roads that are on the schedule, and we're headed down a path to start to defer infrastructure maintenance. And we just said that there are 2 other townships that are playing catch up because they deferred maintenance. So that's the point I'm trying to make.
David, and that's probably 2 of only of 2 likely 40 or 50 or 60 or even 73 in Chester County of the 73 municipalities. Mark, I would ask you one thing. You've got other roads on the schedule for 2021, and to take a look at any of those roads relative to these and say, and stack them up next to each other and say, well, if we're going to do X road or Y road that we're not talking about that's on your list for next year, we could defer Y very easily, and we can go back and we can do Killern if we want. I mean, that's an internal reassessment that you can do on the immediate short term here relative to these three roads and what you have planned for next year. Is that a fair thing for you to do?
Yeah. But what I have planned for next year, we have to do Clock Tower.
Yeah.
We're starting to lose
Hours and apples.
shoulders to the road. We have to mill them. We have to pave them and get them. And we don't have to do the whole development. And I gave you just partial of development, but we definitely have to do those next year.
But just a comment now, so we have 61 miles of roads. If we do 3.5 miles of roads a year, it takes 17.5 years to do that. So we're deferring a little less than half-mile roads till next year. So the expectation next year is we're going to do almost just under 4 miles of roads. So next year's our cost will be up, to keep back on the cycle.
So it's not impossible to get back on track next year as we look at some other expenditures and look at the way our revenues are performing.
Right, but next year, we'll have to do more than 3.5 miles of roads. We'll have to do almost 3.8, 3.9 miles of roads.
Understand?
Next year, our paving costs will be significantly higher.
Let's back up a little bit here. There's a reason why we're doing this year, and it doesn't apply probably to next year, the next budget year. The reason we're doing this is because we've got a pandemic of coronavirus, and the economy that we are living in is miserable right now, especially for people, not us, not older people that are well-to-do. I'm talking about the people that live down in the apartments, and the people who work in retail, and the people who work in restaurants and bars. This is an unusual year, and we've got to do some unusual things. I want to throw a phrase out here that Mike brought up, and I liked it. It's structural deficit. If we keep spending like we have money coming in, when we don't have money coming in, we're going to build in a structural deficit that's going to make the necessity of a increase in property taxes severe. And I don't want to be here when that happens. And Marty, you want to talk about home values and that sort of thing? Well, let's talk about property tax, because that's the first thing that I look at after I look at the price of a home. And our property taxes are going to go up sooner or later. All I want to do is cut as much as we can and defer a little bit so that those property taxes aren't severe when we have to do it. And that's why I want to do these things now, not because I don't like taxing and spending, but because times are hard on people, and we've got to recognize that.
Yeah, let me address that, and let me introduce a term that I just made up: infrastructure deficit. So basically, what we're saying is we're going to not maintain the infrastructure that we built in this township. And I sympathize with those people that are struggling with COVID. But right now, we're not asking them to pay any more. What we're doing is we're creating an infrastructure deficit that they're going to have to pay for in the future. We're not asking for a tax increase this year. We haven't asked for a
Hopefully
tax
they'll be back
increase
to work then.
But we haven't asked for a tax increase in 18 years in East Goshen Township. So my concern is that we have a built to last community, and we have to maintain it. And we're going to incur the cost this year or next year or the year after. And we're already talking about, needing a tax increase at some point. So the issue that I'm concerned with is the accumulation of the infrastructure maintenance in the future, and the impact if we don't do these incremental maintenance along the way. And that's why I'm not in favor of deferring these maintenance expenses.
Well, and I appreciate that, David. And deferrals, it's not, and they can snowball, but it's not as if we don't have the discipline moving forward and the smarts to manage some of these deferrals to make sure that they are accomplished, but we try and do them in a sequence that is consistent or is at least compatible with our current budget situation. The other element, and I don't like to always focus on appearances, but we've got a couple major infrastructure projects, new improvement projects that we're doing, 3 of them, in fact, and you know what the 3 are. And they're irrespective of where those funds are coming from, but they are from debt that we've accumulated and they have been supported by grants. They are major expenditures. They're new infrastructure, important improvements that are enhancing the quality of the township and life for residents in it, property values, et cetera. However, when some that may be more incising or may be more interested in looking under the covers of our budget say, well, gee, look at the money they're spending on these new projects, and they're going ahead with an $800,000 deficit. What is going on with these folks? They're spending negative on the operating budget, and they are going pell-mell with these other infrastructure, new improvement projects, not replacements or maintenance or major repairs. So there's an appearance issue there as well that plays into some of my thinking, but it's a smaller percentage. And I think it's worth consideration because some may take those kind of comments and inflate them irrationally, but they will still pick up on that appearance aspect. Can we move on, or how do we, where are we on this one as far as yays or nays if we were to defer these 3, understanding that Mark may take a look at his budget or his list for next year and see whether or not any of these should fit in and something else be pulled out of that one. I know what you said about Clock Tower.
Mike, one of the things you got to be careful of is you talk about the 3 new projects. Don't forget, every one of them has some degree of maintenance to them. And
That's
Yeah.
right, Marty.
Mark Miller is good. Mark Miller, we have to be really careful. We don't have a big force. And if they end up with a situation that they really have to take care of, then everything goes to hell in a handbasket because they don't have extra people and they're not going to have extra people. And so you got to be really careful when you say, okay, I'm going to move a road or I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, because they may not be available next year because of we've added some more work on them. And at the same time, we don't know for sure what's going to show up, because when you're dealing with a lot of infrastructure, you never know what's going to happen.
Absolutely. When you build up and you put the additions on and you put another addition on, you put another addition on, it's tough to keep up with the first part of the wing of your house to get the shingles on there because you're trying to maintain the new additions. And that's an aspect that in the long term could end up requiring additional staff to maintain with additional infrastructure. So that's a longer term matter as well that is going to come into our thinking over these next 4 or 5 years as those new projects, the mills, the dams, the paths start to need additional work. And so that's another element that comes in. I recognize it that again, you talk about snowballing deferrals. Well, when you're adding new improvements as well, it gets more complicated. So I recognize that.
Yeah.
At this point in time, I'm ready to continue the deferral of the 100,000 that's listed there for the paving.
I would be as well. I'm in favor of that for right now.
I'm a no.
I'm a no.
I'm a yes. That's 3-2.
Rick, I wonder if you would speak because you're much more informed about the relative police surplus that you see this as a revenue item that can boost our revenue to offset the deficit, the surplus and the OPED. Can you explain that to all of us so that we see that that's real money and that could add to our revenue to decrease the budget deficit?
So the current contract with Westtown calls for the surplus at the end of the year to go to the pension plan. In our discussions with Westtown, there was an agreement that since the pension plan is now about 60-some% funded, so almost 70% funded, and we got a commitment to fund it at 110% of the MMO going forward, that we should take that surplus and return it to the townships. So that's $170,000 that would come back to us in Westtown. Also in the police contract, there's a requirement that we pay the retired officers' health benefits from the trust that they have. And so Kathy pays them throughout the year from our general fund. At the end of the year, it goes in and seeks reimbursement from the trust.
Right.
So the agreement says that in order to accommodate that, we need to put the actual cost that the officers, townships need to contribute the actual cost that for the officers' health insurance, and an additional $225,000 to help make up for the presumed shortfall. Now, we're one of the few municipalities that have even attempted to fund this post-employment medical, and we have it about 70-some% funded. So in our discussions with Westtown, it was suggested or agreed to with them that rather than pay $225, the additional $225, that we know we stop that. So since we've been paying that money to the department over the year, that would add to the surplus, which brings the surplus to about $395, and we're entitled to 55% of us, which means that we get a refund of about $219,000.
Hey, Rick, is all that money, is it saved in the police budget, or is it just saved in our budget? Because if it's not saved in the police budget, it's not going to matter.
It's in the police budget. So if we amend the agreement between now and the end of the year and make it effective immediately, then A, the surplus will not go to the pension plan, and B, Kathy will not transfer that money that's in the budget they already have to the pension trust. So this will reduce the deficit on the revenue side. It'll increase our revenue next year and knock about $219,000 off the deficit.
I think if we could do that, it's a hell of a lot better off, because you're just moving money around. I mean, you're actually getting real savings in terms of that, because you did not say we're not putting it in a fund, right? We're putting it, it's general, it's money to be used for anything, correct?
It would come back into our general fund. It would show up as a receipt.
Okay, that's fine, because that way we do have real money.
I'm in favor of that.
I'm in favor of that too.
I'm in favor of that.
I'm good with that.
Okay. Thank you, Rick, for that. I couldn't have done it without you and that explanation.
Hey, Rick, when we did the original budget, we took the contribution out, right? The 170. So is this 219 in addition to the 170 we agreed to fund at 110?
We typically do not, we have never shown a refund from the police department in our budget because we never knew how much it was going to be. But we know now, based on Kathy's numbers as of November, that if we do this, we'll have about $395,000 coming back to the two townships.
Okay.
The next,
Okay, excuse me, Mike, we have a caller that I'm allowing into the meeting now. I just wanted to let you know.
as long
Okay.
as the caller knows that there's no public comment at this point in the work session until the board is completely done with the work session, and at the very end of the meeting, is the way work sessions are structured.
Okay.
Who is it that's on board?
Well, it doesn't matter. It's a person.
Yes, it does. It matters to me, maybe not matter to you.
Well,
I mean, I don't know. I'd like to know who's there. You
so
happen to
I'm
know
going to say the
who's
same thing no matter who's there, but go ahead.
Okay, caller that just entered the meeting with phone number ending in 824, please unmute yourself by hitting *6 and state your name.
My name is Kay Whittle. I live on East Strasburg Road.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
Apologize
Kay.
for being late.
Okay. Okay, so the next item, we've talked about, there's been a discussion that the capital transfer, the capital reserve fund, we've got what's referred to as a $600,000 surplus. So there was a purposeful decision to reduce the transfer from the general fund to the capital reserve fund by $100,000 to begin to decrease that surplus and get it in line with the capital schedule and wasting schedule depreciation. And my suggestion was, under the current circumstances of this large 10% deficit in our proposed 21 budget, that we advance that pay down, if you will, or that decreasing that surplus by further decreasing for 21 the capital transfer by an additional $100,000. So we'd be taking $200,000 off of that $600,000 surplus in 2021, thereby further decreasing the proposed or the indicated deficit in the proposed budget.
So Rick, can we talk about the that capital surplus that's used? Would that be used for any capital
No.
expenditures that weren't anticipated in the budget? That's kind of our cushion.
Well, actually, the that $600,000 is money we have in the capital reserve budget that's in excess of the amount needed to for the accumulated depreciation of all the equipment we have.
Right.
Essentially, it's excess money.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one thing that when it comes to where you take the money from, we have a couple of different options because we have a couple places that we put money we had to. One of the things that's important is you really want to drive down the operating reserve fund as quickly as you can, because if in fact it comes time for a tax increase, you don't want to have $5 million sitting in the capital reserve balance, because they're going to say, what the hell's the matter with you? You're nuts. And if they do that, and if for some reason you don't put the tax in when it's necessary, or small tax when it's necessary. I'm a small tax guy, and a lot of them, that's the way I rather function. But we've learned from the last tax increase that if you got to do it that way, otherwise you run into a real problem. So I understand what you're saying. When you get all this money here, there, all used up, so to speak, it's not going to matter where it comes from and what time. But along the way, you need to know you're going to use it all. You're not going to end up saving it. It's impossible to save it, because we wouldn't be talking to tax if that wasn't the case. But the problem is that until you use that up, and every dollar that you don't use from there is a dollar that's still in there. So I would say you got to be really careful about which you unload first. And I would suggest strongly that most of the money to cover these initial years, these early years, comes from the operating fund budget, the regular operating fund budget, because that's the one people are going to look at.
I'm right with you then, Marty. Then you talked about capital. If you want to go to this so-called rainy day fund, this operating reserve.
No, that's not the one I'm talking about.
Well, you mentioned operating reserve. You didn't.
No, I'm talking about the ones in the regular reserve, the regular operating reserve.
Well, we've got 5 million in that. We've got what, 2 million in the operating reserve, right?
2.5.
But back, stop.
Go ahead.
The first account is called the fund balance.
Yeah.
And there's $5.4 million in that. Right. That's the fund.
That's the one you got to bring down.
Yeah, that's the operating reserve account is like $2.6 million. And that's part of the operating fund, but it's a reserve fund for it.
Okay.
It's more like a rainy day fund.
I'm fine with bringing down the general fund balance, but not in the precipitous manner that's indicated in the 2021 budget. That's why we're talking about these items. So yeah, and in fact, if all of these items were implemented, we're still looking at drawing down the general fund equity, our fund balance by $150,000 anyway, if we decide to go through with these ones that are on this list. So we are drawing that down. Drawing it down a little bit further, yeah, I can give into that, but I'm not there yet. But the operating reserve account this one with 2.5 million, to me, as the public is listening, they may get the wrong message, but we're very fortunate to have an operating reserve fund in addition to our fund equity, our fund balance in the general fund. There are very few municipalities that have that. Boy, would I like one in the municipality I work in. We don't have it. So we're very fortunate there. But again, that comes back to one of my opening comments. They're fragile. And while somebody would like to have them well spent down before there's a tax increase, no, there is a certain amount of responsible fund balance that needs to be maintained, because as we all know, it's much easier to spend it than it is to save it. And particularly in the environment that we are moving into in the next decade, with revenues going flat and not being able to rely on real estate transfer for big boost here or then, or at least sporadically, we have to be very careful of those fund balances. And that's why it's such a difficult challenge when you start to look at a structural situation with the financial picture of balancing deferrals with managing the finances and the savings that you have, all in a public environment where the appearance is they're going to tax and they have that kind of money in the bank. What, are you kidding me? Well, a lot of folks just don't understand the basic finances of municipal government, and we will have to make that educational case when we do make a decision to increase the taxes in a year or 2 years, whenever it's going to be, to say that these fund balances are necessary. They're necessary for our structural support. They're necessary for our credit rating, and they're necessary for the proper operation of an organization the size of a 20,000 population local government. With that said, we're still looking at a possibility of reducing, or the likelihood of reducing our general fund balance next year anyway, whether it's $150,000, we're going to be taking it down or more. But when you start to look at more than $500,000, and in this case, 800,000, and then you look at our 5-year forecast ahead and how quickly that will go, that's precipitous territory, and I don't feel comfortable with it. And that's what's precipitated this whole conversation, this whole discussion.
Mike, I'm confused by the wording on this bullet point. So what you're really proposing is to reduce the $600,000 surplus in the capital reserve fund, or the capital reserve fund, by $100,000.
100,000 more. I think it was originally proposed, Rick, as dropping down 100,000 the transfer. I'm suggesting we drop the transfer down by 200,000.
Yeah.
And it cuts into that 600,000 by that much more, 100,000 more. But that's so it's decreasing the transfer, the expense out of the general fund into the capital reserve fund. We are decreasing that expense by a further 100,000. Rick?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
everybody.
what Mike said is correct, yes.
Yeah,
It's correct. There's no doubt about that.
So that one.
Now, I don't know, I don't want to confuse people, because there's a technical term for the other fund, the $2.6 million one.
Operating reserve.
What is that?
The operating reserve fund.
The operating reserve fund. I personally, I'm a believer, you don't touch that until, that's the last straw in my book. Because if you have some super event on top of whatever's going on now, you need that as a rainy day fund. That's called a rainy day fund in the general terms. Because if you use that up early on, you're really in big trouble.
I would agree with that, Marty. And fortunately, CV-19 this past year has affected us this year, 2020, but fortunately not as severe as it could have been. Even if it was severe, we would still be looking at our general fund balance. And you're right. That's almost the nuclear option. And so I agree with you there. You want to preserve it, but in the context of deferrals and big deficits, my book was open on that. If we couldn't find it otherwise in some of these aspects we're talking about tonight.
You got quite a bit of money between the regular reserve, capital reserve, and the operating fund balance that's in our general fund.
Yeah, we got almost $8 million at the moment.
You got a fair amount. I mean,
yeah,
it's going to take a while. Now, the one thing that it's been said, and I can understand why, because it looks that way on the budget, but you got to remember that when you talk about the budget for this year, you're talking about roughly $500 million. And that's a lot of money. But don't forget that there's 300 that deferred. in other words, whatever you chose last year, when the final tally is made at the end of the year, it should be $300,000 less. Because they're moving it to this year or to next year I'm talking about. So really next year's budget is only $500 million. You can't penalize next year because you're shipping $300,000 over. You actually should be shipping $300,000 over because you would have spent that during this past year if in fact it worked out that way. So I'm just saying that you got to be really careful of how you say that, because yes, if you look at one number, it's $800,000, but that number is broken down into a couple of pieces. And it's important that you talk that way, because the people will pick on the fact that you're talking about a big number. And if there's a difference between $500,000 and $800,000 in a 1 year's budget, for sure.
Sure. But they're real dollars, and they are, and again, they play into, the concerns that David has about deferrals. So they are real dollars, whether it's 500 or 800.
That's right. I'm not sure. I mean, you should try not to do that if it's at all possible, but we have to do it for whatever the reason is.
Yeah.
And we're doing it, and it's going to be done that way.
Well,
And we're going to, so
that's why we're talking about it. Well,
That's
look, where do we stand? Where do we stand on the capital, the suggestion to increase or further decrease the surplus by reducing the transfer by $100,000? So as suggested.
I'm in favor of that.
I'm in favor. I like it, Mike.
Like, just to clarify, you're increasing the transfer from general fund to the capital reserve.
No, we're decreasing it.
you're
We're
digging
decreasing
the other way. It's going the other way.
The transfer to the capital fund is an expense, Chris.
Right.
Decreasing that expense by another $100,000. So whatever that number is, we're taking another $100,000 out of it. It was already indicated that it was decreased in the budget currently by $100,000 to reduce that surplus. Now we further decrease it by another $100,000 with this suggestion, so that expense comes down another $100,000.
Okay.
Chris, John's note on that was that there would be about $600,000 in the capital reserve. If
Right.
Mike is basically saying, because of that, instead of being 6, it's going to be 5.
Four.
Actually,
Well, it's going to be, no, at the end of the year, he was talking about being, so, well,
Um,
I see, I'm thinking about whether or not,
It's
how you play with
$600,000
it.
at the end of the
It's how you
year.
play with the numbers. Yes, it's going to be 400,000 in actual
Right.
dollars next year. It should
Yeah.
be 1 and 1, but it's not. It's 2
Correct.
and 0.
Gotcha.
John, you support that. Michelle, you support it. I don't know how Marty or David, if you will, please.
I prefer the operating fund balance, but I can live with that if you want to do it that way. It's not a line in the sand for me.
yeah, me too.
All right, we'll give that a thumbs up all around. Okay. The winter maintenance snow budget. If you look at the numbers for this year, presuming we don't get a serious hit before the end of the year, I think if I'm not mistaken, we are going to end up spending maybe projected half of what we budgeted. The forecast, understanding what the crystal ball is, it's always very clear, very foggy, but the forecast is for another similar type of winter. And instead of increasing that budget, as it's indicated, that we essentially use the end of the year for a projection of, I think, 126. I don't have it in front of me. And if we add another 50 to that, which is 175 and is still about 50 or 75 less than the budget last year, we'll end up saving $50,000 from the current proposed budget for next year on snow removal. Mark, I don't know what your comment is on that, but it seems like we've got room to spare there. And look, if we have a heavy winter, the expense line is going to go over. But for budget purposes, it seemed to me like we had room that we could take 50 out of that budget, and hopefully we have a similar performance this next year as we've had this year. What are your thoughts?
I'll comment on that because this is one of the areas that I love about. If you leave the budget alone in this effect and it's not utilized, in other words, it's a low use year, that $50,000 can be used next year or any other year you want to use it for anything you want to use it. It's savings. it's a way of saving money. If you drop it down to 50 and it is a $50,000 year, you've gone to zero. So you're really looking to, you want to protect yourself from a heavy snow or a bigger snowstorm year than what they anticipate. And if that's true, you got it covered. If it's not true, then you got the money saved, and you can use it in whatever you want. You can use it to decrease the cost or whatever you want to do, where you could save it.
Right.
But I would leave it alone because it's going to be self-correcting.
Okay.
I would not change the budget at all from what's in the budget, because it protects you on the high side and a little higher side, and it protects you on the low side because you can use it someplace else.
All right, good comment. Let me share the specific numbers with you. The budget under snow for 2020 is $266,000. The projected 2020 figure for it is $126,000. 266 projected 126. 21 proposed budget is $224,000. So it's less than 2020 by $40,000. But when you look at the year-end performance here at 126, if we take 50,000 off that 224, we've still got $175,000 in the budget, which is 50,000 more than the performance this year. So
I
there's
didn't have a chance to look at those numbers, but I'm saying in general speaking, no matter which way you do it, if you don't use it, it's going to be there anyway.
true, but to balance the budget, that's why I'm trying to.
That's that you can use it to do that, or you can use it for additional expenditures and something else that you would want to spend it on, if in fact that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
I'm saying that we have done this over the past, and it's always worked to our benefit. So I'm used to seeing that kind of thing. It doesn't bother me to have that in the budget, because I know that one way or the other you're going to be able to take advantage of it. You're going to use it or you're not going to use it. I'll tell you, the 1 year, remember about 3 years ago, we had 30 inches of snow. We got creamed because the budget didn't reflect that. And we got creamed. I mean, it was brutal, because these guys were working all the time. And it's like they never went home. And
Mark, you there? You unmute yourself, Mark Miller.
I don't know that he's here. I don't see his
There.
dog.
There you go, Mark. 266 in the budget this year for 2020. Looks like we're going to spend less than 130. We've put in to the budget next year 226. Even if we drop that down by 50, we've still got 175, which is 50,000 over this year's performance. Is that something you feel? Obviously, if we have more storms, we're going to have to do what we need to do. But 175 over for next year compared to what we're going to finish up this year with 126 seems like a reasonable freeboard.
We have salt. All our bins are full. In previous years, there were 2 bins that were almost empty.
So that's $25,000 worth of salt right there.
Correct. So we're ahead of the game. Plus, we have another 750 ton sitting on the dock that we already paid for. So we do have some wiggle room there in the event that we have to use a lot of salt.
That's a hell of a lot of money they spent so far. So I would definitely cut it the amount that Mark's already spent on salt.
That's 750 tons is $45,000 on top. So we've got $70,000 of inventory salt paid for and in our coffers. I don't know, Mark. I think taking 50,000 off of what we got there right now and bring it down to 175, and then hearing this inventory, I feel even more comfortable taking that down from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean,
So
if you take it down, I don't think it's detrimental to the budget. I mean, if you take it down, it's a good thing. If we were to get a 36-inch snowstorm or whatever, I would think the state would make it a state of emergency, which, helps us get material and so forth. So what you have it knocked down to, I personally can live with.
And Mark, what did we do with this year's budget? Did we use it all up?
No.
Only 126 of 266.
And I have 7, because I don't have room for it. I have 750 tons sitting on the dock or that we already paid for. So we have that plus the 3 bins are full.
So that's 45,000 at the dock and 25,000 in the bins. There's
Right.
$7,000.
You know, 3 bins. Usually we keep 2 bins empty so we can use them for other stuff during the summer. Unfortunately, we didn't get any snow last year, so you had that salt still sitting.
I would do,
So I'm comfortable taking it down 50
Got
there.
it.
I'm supportive of that one.
I do that.
So
too.
am I.
I do that too.
I'm good with it.
Yep.
Why doesn't somebody else talk for a while? I mean, David made a really good point in the beginning of the meeting about our future procedures here with having an opportunity for the full board to review the budget. Keeping in mind, again, very respectful of the finance committee, but staff component and the supervisor component. It's an advisory committee, just the way the ABCs are and the other respective. And I think that having the full board involved and engaged in an actual scheduled work session like this one in advance, post recommendations in the finance committee, but instead of just leaving the budget out there, again, which I was tardy with and not respectful of, we have scheduled at least one scheduled work session prior to our November authorization meeting, maybe even 2 work sessions, depending on how difficult the budget challenge might be for the years ahead, starting next year. So I think that's a really good idea, David, if that's your thoughts that you have.
Yeah.
One of the things that are important to know, when you had John doing the budgets, he took all this stuff into consideration. And I think if you went back and looked at, put $300,000 in the last year, you probably figure his budget was probably right on. And so it's a little hard for me because he's been here for 8.5 years and he's been pretty much right on to target, because the way he does it, he under budgets the expenses of the revenue, and he puts a higher number in the expenses. So he's got a very conservative budget, so which it really kind of blends in nicely at the end, because no budgeting purpose in this business is going to be 100% accurate. I don't care how good you are.
I agree.
It's just not going to happen. So you just got to be prepared for some differences. But John is really good at doing this, and it's hard to question what he has come up with, because I would be surprised if he's not close to being on the number this year.
No, he might be, but and
Does anybody know what the budget? Does anybody have the original end of the year budget projected for last year? Because if you add what it's going to be plus $300,000, you're going to be close. And I think that's a good number. You can't.
Well, is it okay if I jump in?
Oh, sure.
all yours, Michelle.
Okay, so I liked the fact that John offered us options for balancing the budget. There are a lot of things on here that are just not feasible. A lot of things that are not palatable to me.
You mean the
But
big
He gave us
This
an
is-
option sheet, Marty, with like 25 items.
yeah, I was gonna say, like, I'm trying to show it to you. I can't. It's options for balancing the budget, and it lists 1 through 24 different items. And I'm looking at some of the easy pickings here. And number 17 says limit PSATs to just the Board of Supervisors and manager, and that's $2,500 savings. I like that. Amending the code to eliminate the radio booster requirement. I think that that's not something that we should do, but I think that we need to consider potentially deferring that implementation one more time.
Remember,
Be out of compliance with our
a lot
own
of money on
ordinance.
that.
That's the thing. We're out of compliance with our own ordinance. It's just, and it's $31,000 though. I mean, that's something that we could potentially, is it something that we could potentially start putting our coupon money away for? Maybe. Number 19 is eliminating the Paley Pike 3D model for the Futurist Committee. $5,000. It's a lot of money. And eliminating one of the e-waste events. I think we need to think about doing that. We need to eliminate one of the, unfortunately, conservancy plantings. I think we need to reduce the Malvern Library contribution. And we need to cut the visiting nurses contribution by 100%. We don't give to all of the nursing facilities in the area, we shouldn't give to any. And then reducing the police pension MMO to 100%, the $58,000, that comes out to $111,625 plus, and those are actual cuts. And then we're looking at memberships too. You know, we've got a lot of memberships. The memberships add up to a lot of money. When you start adding up all the memberships, it's, you know, we're paying out thousands of dollars in various memberships every year to different organizations. And some of those organizations are essential, but some of them are not. And some of them are redundant. I'd like to start looking at specific memberships. And I know that it's getting into the weeds, but I'm looking for actual ways to cut money. And sometimes you have to get down in the weeds and actually pick out the weeds and know which are the weeds and which are the, you know, the flowers. And we need to know which of these memberships are actually weeds. We don't need to contribute to the CCC BNI anymore. We're the only township in the entire county that contributes to them. That's what, $350, $450 that doesn't get us anything. It maybe makes us nice neighbors, but the fact is that you know, I went to a couple of these websites and I found minutes that for lack of transparency, I mean, I'm finding minutes for some of these things from 2016 as the most recent. And I think that we need to look at which of our professionals really need to have us pay their memberships to their professional organizations. I personally have to pay my own professional organization membership fees. I have to pay my own continuing education. I can't expect my employer to do that. And I think we need to start looking at which of these memberships really are essential to township business, period. I don't want to have, you know, I don't want to say, I don't want the secretaries to go to breakfast every month. If it's a $50 or $100 membership fee every year, and to have the secretaries go to a breakfast every month to network. I mean, is it that important for them to do that? Is it more important to send the managers to the networking events? And I think that that's potentially the case. You know, I think we need to start looking at that. And in this day of COVID, at this point, nobody's doing anything in person anyway. Everything's being done via Zoom or Skype or some other type of online platform. We can't have face-to-face breakfasts and dinners and cocktail parties and whatnot. So I think that a lot of these membership fees need to be considered individually. And I think that Rick needs to go through those specifically and see which ones can be cut. So I don't know what anybody else feels, but I mean, you know, $111,000, and that's just items number 17 through 24. And again, I don't think that we should eliminate the radio booster requirement, but we're going to have to potentially push out the implementation of it because we're not in compliance. Like David said, we're not in compliance with our own code.
We have already extended that because we do have a lot of businesses out there that have the same situation. However, we also have businesses already spent the money and put it in. So, but we will have to comply. Put it in next year.
I know that's a problem. Yeah,
that's a safety issue.
One of
It is a safety
one of
issue.
the reasons that this exercise is really hard is because about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, we went through this and eliminated all the low-hanging fruit. And we eliminated an amount because we went through the same process. So we're not left with a whole lot. But you're right. I mean, if you join an organization or something like that, if there's a business reason to be there, you should be there. And we maybe should pay for that. But if it's just for your own reason, the only reason you're doing it, I mean, I never had anything paid for, and I belong to organizations, but they were my own doing. They didn't have anything to do with here. I wouldn't ask anybody to pay for it, and we should either.
Like the Brandywine Conservancy, I don't know what we even do with them. It's $450 membership. The Pennsylvania Municipal League is apparently code training and floodplain management. That's $450. We need that. But does anybody actually attend these meetings and these courses? Do they take the courses? Are they doing the training? We've got TMAC for $1,200, which I understand is essential because of the various, if I'm not mistaken, the various grants that have been written for various things. But I mean, Pennsylvania Association of Code Officials, $60 per person. It keeps the code officials updated. Is it a state organization? Is it a duplicate of one of the other code memberships? We've got Penn BOC. We've got Cato, which is just raking in all sorts of money, and their membership. I mean, I don't know what we're really getting out of that membership. Pennsylvania Park and Rec, I think we have to do that. Floodplain Association. I mean, you know, the list goes on and on and on. And what are we actually getting from these?
Cato is not an organization you want to cut. I'll tell you that. I mean, hell.
I understand what you're saying, but the thing is, some of these organizations are redundant, and some of them can be considered for elimination. We could be looking at a few $1,000s here. We have to find that. Look, there's more low-hanging fruit here, is what I'm saying.
Let's let Rick look at it. I would say this, Michelle, from my experience, PSTATS and the services that it offer, I think it's worth every dollar. That is an excellent organization. The Pennsylvania Recreation and Park Society, they are an important element for any parks and recreation organization, the ABC group, as well as the director. BOCA and the codes officials, those are good professional organizations. There are some core here that I think are really important and part of a good structured educational and association relationship that are worth supporting, and that there are values in it. Some of the others that may be peripheral, TMAC also I support, but some of the others that are peripheral, if you're not a member, you still will get notices about classes or workshops. You may pay a few dollars more, but other than that, if there's not something to gain from it. The Brandywine Conservancy, the subscribers fee of $450 a year. If nobody's going to the subscribers meetings and I go to them, I don't see too many folks there. You know, that's an example of some institutional spending that we could reduce. But I would ask, you know, Rick to take a look at that, and if there are some changes he would suggest for next year as he talks to the staff and says, you know, do we really need this one? I do not want to put the burden of professional organizations within our local government expenditure of those on the staff. I think that's a reasonable component to include in their, if you will, as a peripheral compensation. But there may be a number of them. And again, as you mentioned, Michelle, getting into the weeds of institutional spending is cumbersome. It's a bit tedious, and it seems trite, but sometimes over years, these institutional expenses can just go on from year to year, and they may not be serving the value. So it's worth a look. And I would suggest that we leave it to Rick and see what his thoughts are coming back to us. We may not be able to do anything immediate in the next few days. I mean, but he's only got so much time, but I think it's worth a look. See, when you mentioned the visiting nurses, I know we've had a relationship with them as they make their way to different. We usually ask for a report who they served over the prior year to justify the expense. That's one to look at. The library one, I would feel very uncomfortable. $1 per capita is not an unreasonable thing, and we're not there. We were there at 18,000 people, and I think it was 18,000 that was just increased, I think, as I see it, to 22,400 or whatever. I don't think that would be a terrible thing to cut, but I don't know the details of the library. I don't know the usage of East Goshen residents to it. We get statistics in East Bradford for our resident use of the Westchester Public Library.
We get them from Malvern.
Yeah. So, you know, those are a couple of things. Now, the 3D model, I'm not even familiar with the 3D model of the trail, but for $5,000, that one just got my attention. John says, well, it might hurt the morale of the Futurist Committee. I'd like to know the efficacy of a $5,000 3D model is something that's a necessary thing. What will they be doing with it to benefit the operation, the maintenance of the trail? I don't know. Jason may know that one.
Yeah, that's actually the 3D model of they felt a visual model would be helpful to visualize the
TNT.
traditional neighborhood development idea. So we did question the visiting nurses, and someone who's more familiar with that than I said we get a tremendous amount of value because of the age community that we live in, that we get a tremendous amount of value from the visiting nursing thing. I don't know. I'm going on what I was told by John.
They do provide a service to a lot of
Yeah,
people.
but I mean, there are other organizations out there. That's the only one, and that's just Chester County. And why aren't we giving also to Mainline Health? Why aren't we giving also to, and any of the other, like,
years and years? I have no idea. That was even before my time.
This is that institutional spending that Mike was referring to, and it's stuff that we have to stop and look at and decide, is this really value to all of our residents or not? And I mean, we're talking about maybe a small percentage of residents are getting a benefit from this, but most residents in our township, thankfully, have insurance. Most of them do. And so we shouldn't need to have to give the nurses another $6,000 to do what they're already getting paid to do by their health systems and insurance reimbursement. Medicare is very, very helpful with that. And Medicare gives them a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, that on the overall, the gestalt of some of these things, it's a tough call. We have a police department. I don't think I've ever had to call the police. We have these community services that local government puts in place, fire services, et cetera. And then we look at some of these lesser services, who benefits from them and who doesn't. It's in building community, building networks and relationships, it does cost a few dollars. Some of them may seem peripherally trite and unnecessary. I don't know whether we want to, whether I feel comfortable cutting some of those immediately, but maybe looking at those possibly for next year, and advance notice saying that, based upon what we've seen or this and that, we feel that we're going to disengage our contribution or lessen it or something to that effect. But I'm a little uncomfortable with a couple of them right off the bat before we know some details about how they performed. I haven't seen any annual reports from them and what they've done for us, whether it's the library or whether it's visiting nurses. I have a little trepidation there, but I share your concern, Michelle, absolutely on the number of those items that can add up, and over time, if they're just ignored and they end up becoming, just excesses of something that is not providing any value.
So given
I looked at the rest of this list, and we're talking about salary cuts, we're talking about staffing cuts, we're talking about cuts to the fire department, and so to me, that's a little bit less palatable. Like I said, if we have to start looking at that to make things happen, to balance things out, then maybe that's something we're gonna have to look at in the future. But we're talking about public safety here, and I don't want to have to go to the fire department and tell them that we're not going to be able to fund them at their current level or more. They're going through a difficult time right now too. They can't raise money. I get it. I don't want to eliminate the volunteer firefighter stipend. I think that's just wrong. I think it's important for us to look internally first. And I'm not saying count all the big pens, for crying out loud. I'm just saying simply we need to start looking at institutional spending and be a little smarter about it moving forward.
I don't know if everybody looked at the information, but there's a 2-year a significant increase in the contributions to the fire company, because if they went belly up, we're obligated to provide fire company service. We can't afford to have them go out.
And we've got pressure also now coming to us through Kim and Chaz at Good Fellowship Ambulance. They're looking to all the municipalities to close a real gap, and she presented a very effective presentation about the challenges they have closing their budget, challenges they have getting reimbursements, et cetera. And they're pressing. We've tried to increase our contribution in the municipality I'm involved with stepwise, but it's not nearly, at this point, it's only half of what they're seeking from us as a municipality in East Bradford. And we're not going to be able to close that quickly, but we're trying to address it. And that's another example where safety, public service, first responder service, if you will, in the form of ambulance service, is they are really stretched, and they're a fine organization. So that's another one related to fire that we're going to see pressing us. It didn't pop up here, but we're going to be seeing further requests to try and increase that contribution going forward as well in these years ahead. So those challenges are going to continue to hit us as their operational costs go up and their requirements for training, et cetera, et cetera.
So where are we right now? Where I think we are is that we just on the first piece of dialogue we had, we whacked about $650,000 out of the deficit. And to Michelle's point, I think that, and to agree with Mike, that becomes a management issue instead of a board issue. I think that we charge Rick and the department heads to look at things like memberships and magazines and subscriptions and things like that to cut where they can. I think the other items that you brought up are, library, visiting nurses, without more information about the benefits of the services. I think that we engage that in the budget process for 2022. So what does that leave us?
I think with all the cuts, we've got to figure out how we're going to manage the money that's available to provide the services, because we can't do this ad hoc. It's not going to work. You got to have a plan. You must have a plan on how you're going to, when do you think you're going to run out, and what are you going to do to minimize that? And
Perfect, Marty. Good timing. One of the things that I offered comment, David has picked up on it as well, is that I think somewhere down the line, and whether we can engage it this next year and start it up, it's a heavy lift. We've got transition going with the staff, important transition that has to be addressed. And once somebody is put in place, whether it's director of finance or the manager, when Rick steps down in the middle of next year, it's not just once they're on board that okay, everything's great again. They've got to get their feet planted, and that's not going to happen in 3 months or 4 months. They're going to, before they get the lay of the land and they're really feeling like they put their both feet in, it's going to be close to a year. So there's only so much that they're going to be able to absorb as key staff. But I think that we need some sort of, let's refer to it as a comprehensive fiscal plan that starts to look at the period of maybe 2022 or 2023 through 2030. And I'm not talking just about projections. I'm talking about having some expertise, probably third party, that helps us structure a fiscal plan going forward that includes revenue enhancements, timing of them, and tuning those in with some of the projections that John very effectively put together during his tenure, refining those as necessary, but no different than our comprehensive plan about land use and services, that I think it's time that we, and then with the circumstances in front of us presently and going forward the next 5-6 years, that we have a fiscal plan prepared. I don't know how exactly what the resources are, how to get it done, but something to make inquiry about trying to find the right resource is going to cost a couple bucks, but that will also serve to help us as a board to make the important decisions that have to be made down the road when we've got a blueprint in front of us, no different than a comprehensive plan. It doesn't mean everything has to be actionalized and implemented, but you've got something as a foundation that's got a solid rationale to it. And I think that that's something we also need to consider.
Well, I think that that's correct. I'm not sure if you need the outside placers or not. It's not that difficult to figure out, when the hell you're going to run out of money. I mean, that's pretty obvious. If you got a pretty good way of identifying what the budgets are going to be, you're going to know when there's nothing left. So, and I think the critical thing is for people to understand, there's a couple ways of doing it. One, you wait, and this is a fact of life. And we've had one way of doing it, and there's two ways of doing it. One, you wait till you need it, and you blast a big tariff change or rate increase in there, or You do a series of small ones along the way and let it build up and you get to the same point. And I prefer that way. That's the way our boards work, but that doesn't mean that this board's going to work that way. So, but you have to have a plan in place and you have to live with that plan, because otherwise it's helter-skelter and you don't want to be helter-skelter.
Well, that, Marty, you're right. And while we might be able to do it internally, it's not going to happen easily in 2022 because the new finance director getting in tune with the staff, with Chris and others, is going to take time. They're going to have other things they're going to need to be doing. And before we know it, it's going to be June and they're going to be digging into the budget for the next year. And that is a full occupation. I do think that when, if a plan, a so-called fiscal comprehensive plan were put in place with the assistance of an outside resource, with our input and our investment in it, that will serve to fortify the will of the elected officials, whomever they may be, to make some of the tough choices. Doing it internally is potentially suspect by pundits and people that want to pick apart, say, well, you just figured it out yourself and did it, but did you have a professional look at it? That's some of the value in having that done. No different than a comprehensive plan. We don't do that internally. We do use a lot of internal resources to make it, to coordinate it and put it together, but it's a third-party professional group that really helps us along the way, whether there are grant funds available or not. Again, it's a relatively big lift. I think it's something that's worth at least investigating to see whether or not there's some viability to doing such a plan to help us see our future a little bit better and a little more independently, perhaps. Objective.
I think it's worth noting that the board has adopted a financial policy.
Yep.
That essentially says that the general fund shall maintain a balance
Right.
at 20% of the annual revenues. And that money should include the operating reserve fund. Based on the latest projections that John did, if the board does nothing, does not put any taxes increases on for now, that will not have to occur till the end of 2025.
Right.
That's assuming you use that. And I'm suggesting it not be used. So it's going to come sooner than that.
No, this is assuming based on the numbers we had as of back in summer. When we did
Planning session.
at
But
the end of
he put the operating reserve fund and the regular balance, the regular fund, all in the same cart. And
Correct.
That to first 20%. I personally, I don't know about anybody else. I personally wouldn't touch that rainy day fund until you need rainy day money.
What he's saying is you have the operating reserve fund of about $2.8 million, and you have the additional revenue in the fund balance.
That's right.
The audit does not occur until the end of 2025.
That's if you use both of them.
Well, that's what he's saying. It's
I
still
know.
there, Marty. Marty, it's still there.
Yeah, it's there. I think you're foolish. I personally don't believe in using that other than for.
Marty, he's not using it. He's using it as the cushion. That's what he's saying. You need a cushion of 20%.
I looked at it too, Rick. I know he used it. I know exactly what he did. But
basically, you got $6.4 million over time, and it will take us a while to spend that if we deficit spend every year.
But I think
before we go off on this, the purpose of tonight's meeting. So what other I think David said, so we went through Mike's list of items. Does anybody else have a specific line item they want to talk about? So we can focus on that and keep us going forward.
I do not.
David?
I already brought up my issues for the most part. I would just also like to point out that I don't know where the police budget stands, and that's a bigger part of our budget than anything.
So do you want to, well, before we go to police, is there anything else on the township budget?
Yeah, anything more on the
Township budget that we need to do, or do you want to adjust?
I don't have anything else.
I don't have anything else.
Based on Mike's numbers, if we did everything Mike suggested, it would take it down by 669, and we're So it's
Well,
like
we just-
$200,000. So you're going to take it down about, roughly, essentially, we didn't do the total pond. So you're going to take it down about to reduce the deficit to about 449, which means the deficit will be about about $340,000.
How do you,
And are
how do you
are
get
any of
that?
the,
How do you get that? When I,
Your total list, everything on your list was 669.
right.
We're not, we're only taking 100, cutting 180 for the ponds. I'm sorry, 180 for the ponds. Right. Okay.
649 was the total.
Okay.
and are any of the cuts that I suggested going to be considered?
Well,
Because-
which line item you want to talk about?
You ought to vote on those individually, Michelle. If you-
Then let's go through them one by one. Let's go
Yeah,
ahead and
okay.
go through.
Let's
Num-
do it.
Information.
Number 17 is limit PSATs to just the Board of Supervisors and manager. Yeah or nay?
Nay,
I'm sorry?
no,
No? John?
Yes,
David?
No,
No,
Marty?
no,
Okay. So that's 2, 3. Okay, number 18, amend the code to eliminate the radar booster requirement
I
or
don't know what that means.
that's the $31,000 radio booster, and we have already made a lot of our township businesses comply.
Do it, and we can't. That, I
So
think we
we,
have to
so
do.
let's not consider that one. Eliminate the Paley Pike 3D futurist model for $5,000. John?
They meet Thursday night. I'll ask them what the hell that
No,
means.
no, no, we're talking, are we gonna consider it or
Yeah,
not?
wait.
John?
You gotta know the hell you're doing.
All right, cut it. Mike,
uh,
$5,000.
from what I've heard, I would say out at this time, out for 21 anyway, out.
David,
no.
Marty?
No, not till we
Okay.
find out, not till we
Okay.
find out what it's about. We need.
I know.
Okay,
we need more information.
eliminating one of the 2 e-waste events. I'm a yes on that. John?
What are you doing?
yes,
Mike?
What are you doing, Michelle? Which one?
Eliminating one of the 2 e-waste events.
I don't know what our performance has been there as far as,
25,000 pounds, and we do 2 a year. We get rid of 25,000 pounds of plug-in electrical stuff. It's a very popular thing, and I'm not voting to eliminate it.
yeah,
Okay,
I'm gonna keep that
Oh,
one.
you should add this, you should add the shredding too, as a matter of fact, because
Okay.
that's what people need.
all right, eliminating one of the 2 conservancy plantings for $1,500.
I would not do it because that's all they have to do in a year.
I agree.
I agree.
got it.
Okay,
Agree?
and then reducing the Malvern Library contribution to
No, I
pre-2020
would not do that,
levels.
because we use.
What-
a lot
How
of-
much do we contribute there?
We
can-
use, I'm
we
sorry,
use
go
a
ahead,
lot.
Michelle.
Go ahead.
We,
then.
we increased it from $18,000 to $22,500 in 2020.
I went
That
to-
was a decision made in
it was $1 It was
2019.
$1 a head, Mike, and I don't know why this board did that, but they raised it up, and I still don't know why they did it.
In 2019, they raised it up to 22,500.
If that's
So we
right,
would save potentially $4,500 if we kept it at $1 a head.
$1 a head is like
Half of
$18,000.
$1 a head is what I've heard from my library, if you will, over in Westchester is being appreciated and their target amount. I can't speak for Malvern, but I'm comfortable with $1 per capita.
I'd agree to that, but by the way, our township utilizes, they come every year and do a report, and we utilize that library a lot. from
Yeah,
East Coast.
we use it more than a dollar.
Yeah,
So-
we use it more than our fair share. So, but I'd be good with reducing that if it
I think
matters.
that's why it was increased.
Marty, how do you feel about that?
Marty, say it again, Marty.
I think it was increased because when the people came to make the presentation on what the usage is in East Goshen, it was a lot bigger than what you thought it would be. And as a consequence, it went from $1 a head up to the whatever the hell it is now. And
So
I-
how do you feel
I
about
don't
it? Yes
see-
or
I don't
no?
see how you're going to cut it because it just doesn't. The Malvern Library is a very interesting situation because of the way it's situated, how much Malvern pays, and the fact that some people are working that thing, like the police department. So they got offsets and some of that stuff, and it's really hard. But we also have a board member or 2, right, Rick? We have 1 or 2 people that are on board.
We
members.
have a board member that one.
They made a presentation, and I'll tell you, the usage of that library by our people is great. You can't-
Okay, so,
not- Not do anything
is
with
it
it.
4-1? Is it 4-1 on that one?
No, David's that way too.
No, I voted to take it to $1 per
Okay,
resident.
so 4-1. Okay.
Reluctantly, I reluctantly.
Yes. These are all, I agree. They're all reluctant. Number 23 is cut the visiting nurses
Wait a minute,
contributions by 50.
Is the library yes or no? Are we cutting it or not?
Yes.
We're
Yes.
taking
We're cutting.
1,800, 18,000, Rick.
And then I would just simply say sharing that with them, because they should know in advance, they should know so they can adjust their expenses as they need to. We'll reconsider, we'll hear a presentation from them next year in 2021, and we'll see what our thoughts are and how we're performing. So that,
Right, and then
door open, but change it for this next year.
Then line item number 23 is cutting the visiting nurses contributions by 50% at $3,000.
I don't know enough about it.
So I'm gonna say,
I would say no. I don't know.
I'm a no. That they provide a lot of services to the residents in need in our township.
Okay.
So no.
I could get a report.
I don't know.
I'd like to get a report.
Yeah, I'm a
Yeah,
no.
we could
I'm gonna
consider
say I'm in favor of cutting it until we get a report, but, and
No.
then the last, so that one's a no then. Reduce pension, the police pension MMO to 100%, and that's 58,585. I'm in favor of that.
You do what? What is it?
Cut the police pension MMO to 100% from the 110% contribution that we've made.
But you
It will
can't-
save us $5,885.
You have to do that with joint. You have to do that with your neighbor.
Yeah, we can.
You can't do that.
Didn't we already agree to that?
No.
No?
I don't know
No.
about that, but you got to go.
Okay.
You have to have a meeting.
So Rick, what do you have as being cut for right now?
So
The model
we're cutting the model.
Yep.
contribution to the library for $4,500 will so we're
Yeah.
$9,500 there total.
Okay. All
And
right, so that's another,
it at this point, Michelle.
and that's another, no, that's still another almost $10,000. And so let's add that 9,500. And then we have to talk about reducing the police MMO. I thought we had already discussed that and determined that, but I guess I was mistaken.
Yeah, John just says here, maybe too late, need agreement with Westtown, and that could be too late to start something up.
Well, we already cut there was a contribution in addition to the original 110, and we cut the additional contribution because we were already hitting decent actuarial funding levels. So we had already kind of reduced that. So that would be a double whammy. And I think we'd have to talk to Westtown about that anyhow. So I think that's maybe if you want to talk about that next year, that would be okay.
I would say this, though, John Herzog brought an interesting thing up with Cahill leaving and the sergeant leaving pretty soon. I think it's come time. I don't think that you should just willy-nilly put them in place. I think it's time to do what do we want them to, how do we want them to look? What
That's a good point, Marty. It may be something we need to do in executive session.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's an executive session item, and maybe sooner than later, we have a meeting with our partners to talk about that, because I'm not comfortable with just I'll just leave it at that, a quick push.
I think.
May I-
Township budget. Say, what else on the township budget?
Wait, time out.
Nothing
Time
else.
out here. I think John has to go back and tell them, don't do anything about the manpower until we have a meeting.
All right. On the general fund budget and the budget at large there, then Rick, nothing more from Lynch.
Nothing more from me.
Nothing more from me.
Hey,
Nothing more from David either.
So the consensus, so
David, don't let him speak for you.
But he already did. He already said it.
I have spoken.
Okay. He's sitting right in front of me. What the hell? I can't miss the guy.
so
He's got nice white hair too.
So the motion is the board to make the changes agreed upon, which are to cut the roads by cut $100,000 from the roads, add the revenue for the police pension and other post-employment benefits, cut $180,000 from the Botry Pond, increase the transfer by 100,000. Yeah, decrease the transfer to the capital reserve by 100,000. So that the net result will take an extra $100,000 from it. Cut the snow budget by $50,000, and
Please,
eliminate the futurist, the Paley Pike 3D model, $5,000, and reduce the library to $18,000, saving of $45.
and then the police revenue items, the two.
And I had the revenue in there. So
That should bring the revised deficit down to somewhere in the vicinity of $150,000.
I think, I don't want to screw things up here, but I think in the library, the commitment's already been made for the, whatever it was, 22,000 something dollars. I think it's already been made. This is late in the year.
all we told them,
Only for this year.
they asked, I said, it was budgeted at 22,005, but that's what in the proposed budget. So we'll tell them it's going back to 18.
Okay,
That's what you want.
you guys make sure we do it though.
Yeah, I will. But then we need a motion to make these changes and advertise the budget.
So moved.
That's just somebody else wants it, something
So
else.
moved.
I would make the motion to,
Marty did.
I already did.
I'd second that then.
All those in favor of the motion?
Now we need to open up for public comment.
Oh, yeah, forgot about them. Susan, we need to open them up for public comment with respect to the budget. Because
We have two callers on the line.
Yeah, who's the second one? Do you know?
I do not know that. We have Kay. Kay, do you have any questions?
Kay might have gone home.
No, she's still there.
1626 East Strasburg Road. I'm one of the people that does a lot of use with Malvern Library, and I am very impressed with what you're doing, but I would really like to see the Malvern Library budget item remain at 2,200.
Thank you, Kay. And caller ending in 381, any comment? Unmute yourself, whoever you are.
381.
I asked her to unmute several times, or asked them to unmute several times. They haven't, so I'm assuming.
So there's a current motion and a second. Public input was received. Any comment on the from the board on the public comment that was just received relative to the open motion?
No,
comment.
I would actually like to say, none of the cuts that we have to make are cuts that we want to make. I think that has to be made very clear. Nobody's excited about making these cuts, but we have to be at least fiscally responsible to our constituents. So.
Just from my experience, if Kay makes the library aware of what we're doing, or what we're planning to do, next week or whenever the 20 days is, you're liable to see people here asking you to put that back in place.
That's good. Okay, well, that's public input, and I appreciate. As Michelle
It'll
said,
be if we reinstate, it'd be a small variance to the budget, but right now it's a budget. So
yeah. Okay. So there's
That's right.
a second.
That's right.
May I speak again? This is Kay.
Yeah, sure.
I just want to say that I am ignorant of the answer to this, and maybe you know. And I guess what I'm speaking from really isn't just my personal enjoyment of the library, but I'm wondering how much the library contributes to some of the schooling issues within the township and the youth. And I'm sorry, I'm ignorant of the information that would help you with this, but I think it's a resource that given a lot of the virtual and the way the incertitude of the schools right now, I think that the library is a resource that as much as we possibly can, we should support.
Okay, that's a good input, Mike Lynch. That's good input, and I think that if through the staff, through Rick Smith, and whether it be Jason or whomever, if we can get a up-to-date report from Malvern the board certainly will take a look at that. If it extends to, the youth that's using it, the seniors, et cetera, and a breakdown and how it's used, the electronic access as well as the paper media that's available, et cetera. That's helpful to us. If we don't change the current motion before the 21 budget is adopted, I certainly will be open to hearing more for 2022, whether that would be reinstated or some other number that would enhance it. So I do appreciate your comment there. And as Michelle Truitt said, these are all tough cuts. And as you were listening most of the work session, David Shuey has a very good point about deferrals and how that can really challenge us going down the road, kicking the can, so to speak, the proverbial can. It's vexing as to how we're going to solve some of these things with the current fiscal situation. And we're going to have to examine it carefully, and we're going to be challenged just as we are this year. We're going to be challenged assuredly this time next year. We are just in that mode now as a local government where our revenues are not keeping pace with our expenditures, and we're going to have these same kind of conversations next 10 months from now. Thank you, Kay.
Absolutely, and I understand, and from what I've heard tonight, I think you're doing an excellent job, and I really appreciate it. This is very hard.
It is. There's no doubt about that.
It's harder when you're sitting over here too.
So a motion second. Go ahead, Marty.
Is there no more comments from anybody? Right? Okay, all those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? It's 5-0 then. Okay,
So given
next-
the dates, the board will will advertise the budget for adoption on the 15th of December.
okay. Nobody's allowed to take, everybody's got to be here. Just in case somebody comes in and says, whoa, what the hell are you doing? That's
Now,
When's
John
our
wants to know-
next meeting?
Pardon me?
John wanted to talk about the police
Yeah.
budget.
Yeah. Should we go on executive session?
No, this is public.
I want to fill people in, and I don't want to talk publicly.
Well, the budget has to be talked about publicly.
What do you want to talk about? That's the question.
Well, the matter is a personnel matter within the confines of the budget, but it is a personnel matter, and I don't want to be. I would prefer, since it's a personnel matter, that it would be executive session.
It is an executive session. That is an executive session matter.
That's up to you, Marty and Rick, how you feel.
That qualifies for an executive session.
But-
That's a fact. We never talk about the personnel in public.
It does affect the budget, no doubt, but it's a personnel matter. We're talking about promotions, potentially filling, et cetera. So whether names come up or not, positions are there, and it is absolutely related to staffing and personnel.
The staffing is a budget is perfectly acceptable this way.
So do we adjourn our budget meeting and then go
I
into
could,
session?
if you want to go in executive session now, is that I could move anybody to the waiting room
Well, wait a minute.
and stop the live feed on YouTube.
I think
Well-
we
And,
could do
and
the-
then when you're done, we can move them back from the waiting room. if
Well, we
there's anybody.
could, or do we have anything else on our agenda? We could adjourn our meeting and then go into executive
Well,
session.
wait a minute,
We
we
can do
haven't
that
even
too.
talked about the budget for police. So if there's anybody has any questions about that, they ought to ask it before we close it off.
Well, that's a good point, Marty. I
Yeah.
Rick the other day when John and I met with him, I said, with some ignorance, I thought, well, every dollar in the police budget was somewhat sacrosanct and there wasn't much room for discretion. But Rick said that's not the case. He gave one example. He said, I think in the police budget, there is $50,000 under legal. That is just a place marker more than anything. I don't know what the performance was of legal services. I understand we had arbitration last year, but 50,000 as an example of a potential discretionary one. Again, anything associated with the police budget then is going to have to involve our partners if we opt for anything for revising those numbers before it's finalized. We're going to have it be copacetic with our partners Westtown.
That is correct.
So,
Which means if you have to propose changes, we need to get them to Westtown sooner.
And later, yeah.
What's the
that's right.
timeline on that,
It's
Rick?
almost too late.
The board needs to adopt the budget on the 15th of December. With budget.
yeah.
So if you're okay with what was presented, then we don't have to do it. But I mentioned, I remember you said you had questions about it. So now's the time to discuss the
Unfortunately, most of the police budget is tied up in labor.
yeah.
And if you're going to make any kind of reasonable inroads to it, you're going to do it through labor. You're not going to do it through anything else. So I have a suspicion that that's what John wants to talk about. So it's the question of the cart before the horse here. I'm afraid that John's going to have to make his case before we even talk about the police budget. 'Cause
Yeah.
The only thing I remember in there being a big ticket item was that program software she's buying to do something or other. I forget what it is, but it was
Yeah, but-
necessary to buy it.
But Susan actually made a valid point. She could actually put everybody in the waiting room for a few moments, and then we could have the executive session for a few minutes and then invite them back in if they choose to come back in.
It may not be-
I think that would be a way to handle it. We can do executive session in the middle of a meeting, especially when it pertains to the next subject that we're supposed to discuss.
Okay, I'll tell you, that may be longer than what you think it's going to be. Because that's going to be the heart of the discussion, because once that's over, you probably pretty much know where you stand. But it could take a while.
Rick, I want to confirm something. The revenue supplements now were part of the motion we made for the changes in the 21 budget. Do those, the OPED and the surplus, do they need the approval of Westtown to be affected, or they do, don't they?
Correct. And in order to implement them, both boards need to execute the amended agreement that we circulated.
It's a board decision, but both boards have to make a decision.
So that's a short timeline, and that's a critical item. So I don't know how you can help us affect that with the schedule, you working with John and getting us all together, Zooming us to, and it could be more than those two items based on what we discussed further tonight. So we could have a list of a number of items, but we're going to have to do that, Rick, probably in the next 2 weeks or so.
Oh, hell no, you're going to have to do it. It's part of the budget. You got to do it now.
The two items that are in, that we previously talked about, the surplus and the other post-employment benefits, both boards are in agreement with that, just a matter of executing the agreement.
Okay, so those are,
yeah.
okay. They've been
Yeah.
settled and not just officially executed. Okay.
Correct.
Well, it's
Rick-
one of the benefits, Mike, of John going down there. He was in favor of it when he was here, and I think he made it happen down there.
You know, it's interesting you say that, John, because the email we got today about PPUs, I said to Rick, I didn't copy everybody on it, but I said, you know, the way that occurred was that, you know, the clarity and the efficiency with which that occurred has to have some influence from John moving down there and quickly saying, let's get this thing done. And that was most appreciated because that was a great resolution and a fair one.
I saw that before I came over here. They're working with percentages. I got to see that, because you got to understand that we're paying for 2 percentages that we're not using. And I'm not sure how they factored that in. There's another way of doing that that's, in my opinion, easier. But I by myself have to look at that. I haven't looked at it yet.
It's a positive. At least it seemed to be a positive on the plus
It's
side.
definitely John's hands in it, for sure.
Maybe we want to go into executive session before we
Yeah, I
say
think
something.
we're going to have to do that.